Says it's live.
Hey, it's live and I muted it. We're ready to go. Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today we have a very special guest, Agapios Ilia from Cyprus, Greece, here to show us and how he does planetary imaging. Specifically today, we were looking at Jupiter, and he illustrate his techniques. For those of us familiar with planetary imaging, we're just talking about some of the pitfalls that are, in and out of our control, mostly dependent on weather. But we'll let Agapios take it away and tell us about how he makes his magic with these images.
Right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Lou. It's great to be back with you guys. Been an incredibly busy period of time for me, but it's always, an amazing time whenever we get to do this with like-minded people. So I'm sitting outside. I'm in my backyard, and it's a strange night because we have thunderstorms coming in and out, and I can see lightning here and there. But that's what happens at this time of the year where I live. But it's looking like the worst is over. So I think we're in the clear, and it's currently 2:40 a.m. and Jupiter has just crossed the meridian. It's at 65 or so degrees for me now, descending, and the conditions are sort of average. Let me just go right ahead and share my screen and pull up fire capture. And there is the live view of Jupiter, and you can just about make Europa over there. So a little bit about my equipment that I have here. Main telescope is the Celestron 9¼ inch, and different from last year, I've upgraded my imaging camera to the Player One Saturn C, which is using the really well-known IMX 533 sensor, and I can talk a lot about and in depth about just how amazing of a camera this has been for me, even though I've had really not that many opportunities to use it compared to my other cameras. But from what I've seen so far, it is a really powerful and high quality sensor, and overall it's been a really good camera for me so far. Really low noise, and the images can take quite a lot of processing before they start showing signs of excessive noise, and with this sort of imaging, that is really essential. And I've got everything lined up here on Jupiter. I've got the ADC installed. I haven't actually configured it for tonight just because I was rushing to set everything up. Seeing as Jupiter is fairly high, there isn't that much of an intrusion from atmospheric dispersion, although it is visible. And when we go ahead and do some processing, you will be able to see the effect of the atmospheric dispersion. One thing I have noticed with this camera is that it is somewhat more difficult to fine-tune the atmospheric dispersion corrector compared to my previous cameras, the 462 or the 224 or the 290. And even though the 533, this one, and my previous main camera, the 224, share the same pixel size, I have a feeling that possibly because of the overall size of the sensor, This one being a huge 3000 by 3000 pixel sensor. There's somewhat of a discrepancy with the tuning tool in fire capture, but that's just a suspicion that I have that remains to be tested. But other than that, this newer offering from Player One is something that I can wholeheartedly recommend as a new generation camera. Really well built, really capable, and even though the sensor points to maybe solar or lunar imaging or even deep sky imaging, even though it's non-cooled, it does really well for planetary imaging as well. And it's only maybe 10% slower in frame rate than the queen of fast cameras, the 224. It's only maybe 10% slower, which isn't a huge drawback. The benefit of the much lower noise definitely overcomes that. So to talk a little bit about the conditions, forecast for tonight was incredibly vague, but as is often the case, whenever we have these thunderstorms, and because of all the increased humidity in the air, whenever they just blow past, the seeing tends to be fair to good, I would say, as is the case right now. I don't know how well you can see that on the live screen, but it's fairly stable. We can see all the large structures easily. We cannot really hold finer structures for extended periods of time. That's the number one indicator of great seeing, is when you can hold those finer structures for extended periods of time. But even under these conditions, the power of stacking, the power of high frame rate capturing is here to help. And even if we can't really see the finer structures in the live feed, stacking and processing will pull them out. And let's just go ahead and take a quick 1 minute video and illustrate this point. So as you know, I use and highly recommend fire capture for controlling your cameras. Fire capture is, in my mind, and many other planetary images will tell you the same thing, the ideal software for this sort of thing, because it's been designed and configured and updated and maintained with planetary imaging in mind, and it's tailored to giving you all the necessary tools to maximize your imaging, from the way you can shoot, from the way you can configure the software with the tools that are available to you through fire capture to help you with, for example, focusing or tuning your atmospheric dispersion corrector, or the way it can talk to your mount or any other software or any other hardware that you're using. It's just a unified environment that you can employ to maximize your enjoyment of doing this sort of imaging. As you can see on the screen, I'm not using the entire available sensor, and this is to maximize the frame rate that I can get from the camera. Let me just illustrate my point. The sensor being a 3000 by 3000 pixel sensor, it's huge for planetary imaging standards. I mean, you can see Jupiter being the largest of the planets, just how little space it can take up into on this sensor, given my telescope and Barlow and everything. So all of this useless space can be ignored with the region of interest tool that's built into FireCapture. So you can either just click and drag a convenient window, or you can choose one of the preset configurations here for just picking a smaller region just around your planet, maybe include a moon if you have one there, and this will make the software will ignore everything else, and it will just read off of those particular pixels, and in this way it will greatly maximize the rate at which the camera can record and capture. A really powerful tool. I highly recommend that if you don't know if you don't know about it, if you haven't employed it, make sure you do, because the added benefit of being able to capture much higher frame rates is really significant. So I've trimmed down my capture area to just about enough to keep the planet sort of comfortably in the field of view. You don't need to have a fantastic mount with incredible tracking precision to do this sort of imaging. All you need is to be able to just keep the planet in your frame of reference. Any mount will do. I mean, in my case, I've talked about this many other times. I have a really old 16, 17-year-old mount that has miles and miles of backlash. So I don't really bother with it. All I have to do is just get the planet in the field of view, and FireCapture can actually auto guide in a sense. There's an auto guide tool that you can use that will just bump the mount around to keep the planet in the field of view. And that's another tool that you can use in combination with the region of interest tool to maximize your available frame rate, because you can contain the planet in a smaller box, and the smaller the box, the faster the camera. Just to give you an idea, with this camera, I can comfortably do something like 150, 160 frames per second on Jupiter. I can go up to 300 on Mars, which is much smaller. So that just speaks to FireCapture's ability to help you control everything you can control in the best way possible, so that then everything is left up to the one thing that you cannot control, which is the scene. And I can talk on and on about FireCapture, but I would love to hear from you guys if you have questions, if you have anything you want me to point out, either about FireCapture or any other of the software that we're going to use tonight. Just feel free to cut me off and come in with a question. It's 3 a.m. for me, so I'm not running on all cylinders. So please, let's do this sort of in an interactive way. So yeah, I've captured a few before we went live, and let's just jump into AutoStackerd, which is the software that we use for analyzing and stacking the images that we're getting with FireCapture. So I've gone ahead and already did a a stack, pretty much using mostly default settings on AutoStacker, and jumping into Registacks and only applying very basic processing, you can see that there's a lot more data in there from what you could discern in the live feed. And again, this is the power of stacking. And one of my, how do I put this? The method that I adhere to when it comes to this sort of imaging is shooting consecutive back-to-back videos for a relatively extended period of time. And the driver behind that is the incredible variability that I get with my seeing conditions. And again, this is something that I've talked a lot about. Even if the predictions from all the various resources out there point to specific conditions, that never means that you're going to get, or I'm going to get, that kind of condition for the entire night. It's always a fluctuation between all possible states, but there may be some windows of improved conditions. And the key here is to be able to harvest those better conditions. And the best way that I've found to do that is by shooting for an extended period of time, say, for example, a 2-hour period, a 2-hour or 3-hour window containing the time when the target will be at its highest. So let's say if Jupiter transits at 1 a.m., I'll probably be shooting from 11 to maybe 2 a.m. to include that period of time. And by shooting consecutive back-to-back videos, I've given the analogy before. It's like fishing with a net, where you cast a huge net, and if better conditions occur, you've caught them, no question about it. And with this method, you no longer rely on how well the seeing appears to you when you're observing through the telescope or looking at the live feed coming from the camera, because you're shooting consecutive videos and you're shooting at a high frame rate. So even within that 1 minute period of each individual video, there will be all kinds of conditions. And by shooting consecutive, you can isolate the better frames from each one of those consecutive files and combine those together with derotation in WinJupos and get the best possible result that you could have gotten from each night. And I've been doing this method for very, very many years. And in my case, for me, for my conditions, for my equipment, for the way I like to do this, it has been extremely successful. And I think there's probably no better way to do this, because if you rely on how things look, you're bound to get fooled, because even the live feed coming from the camera, I mean, let's just go back to the live feed here. Even the live feed at this moment, what you're looking at is 56 individual pictures of Jupiter in every second. And I don't know how well our brains can capture that information and understand it and evaluate it, so that you can decide when to actively capture. I think it's nearly impossible. So by shooting with high frame rates and consecutively, whatever good conditions have occurred, you have caught them. And again, I've been using this method for a long time, and I feel like it works. You do end up with massive amounts of data for every night. It's not uncommon that I would get like 200, 300, 500 gigabytes of data every night. So that is a lot of data to process and to keep on file. And if I'm being honest, I am one of those who don't keep their files, the raw files. I do, or at least I did. I do keep them until I have evaluated them for any possible scientific interest. Um, I still am part of a professional amateur collaboration program um, to detect possible impacts on Jupiter and Saturn. So until I have evaluated my data for that, I keep the files. After that, I discard them because I don't want to start a hard drive collection. So you can choose to do as you please on that. Storage today is incredibly affordable compared to back in the day. But yeah, in my case, I choose not to. Although I may keep exceptional data sets, and I have kept some, and I do go back sometimes and try something different in processing or some new software or whatever. But even so, it has been said a lot, and I can only agree that nothing will give you any significant improvement more so than the seeing. If the seeing wants, you'll get the best possible image. If the seeing just doesn't want to play, then you can just go ahead and do something else for the night. As is the case tonight, from what I can see, conditions seem to be somewhat deteriorating. Yeah, I don't think it's going to get any better than this, but let's try and maybe adjust the focus a little bit. Focusing is, I don't know how to stress this enough. Focusing in planetary is a, as with any kind of imaging, is a dynamic process. It's never a set and forget situation. You continuously need to be on top of things because, especially with planetary, with the variability of the conditions, you may focus during a specific set of conditions, then those will change, your focus will change. The focus changes with temperature as well. If you have an atmospheric dispersion corrector, that also changes the focus. So it's a dynamic process, and one of the most powerful tools embedded in fire capture is auto align, which I've talked about this again. Auto align is a way with which fire capture freezes the live feed coming from the camera on the screen. So even if you tap on the telescope, the target will be fixed in place. That is really helpful when you're focusing. Let me just demonstrate that live. I don't have auto align enabled now. The telescope is just tracking Jupiter. You can see it wobbling on the screen a little bit. As soon as I touch the telescope, you can see how it's bouncing around, going on the edge there. And if I do the same thing with Autoline enabled, you'll notice that Jupiter is on the center. It's not wobbling around anymore. And I am focusing like I have the world's greatest focuser. And that is an incredible tool, really an incredible tool. Another thing is how all of this software is free. Fire capture being such a powerful tool, but AutoStacker and Registax and WinJupos, they're all free. So kudos to the developers for giving us such powerful tools for doing this sort of imaging. So I've been rambling on and on. Anybody has any input, any questions?
I have one, Agapios. This is Gary Trapezzano. As far as focusing, I tend to struggle with that a lot. So if we could sort of stay on that topic for a second.
Can you describe yourself?
I have a C9.25 and a C11 on a Losmandy mount, and so it's a fairly stable setup. I'm using the ASI 485 MC camera, the atmospheric dispersion corrector, and either a 2 or a 2.5x Barlow, depending on the seeing conditions. And I find that I do better like with my eye than with the tools like the focusing aids like built into fire capture and things like that. But I'm never sure, because I always feel like we don't tend to have good seeing here, so you're always fighting that. But it's sort of like I wait for the longer periods of like when I'm playing with the focus knob, the fine focus. I kind of touch it and then I sit there and I look at the image, and I sort of say, okay, that seemed like it was in focus a larger percentage of time than when the knob was in the other position, the focus knob. But I'm never quite sure. So what kind, are there any tricks to kind of what to look for, and or even some tools that maybe I've never tried?
So here's how I think about it. There's no tool, there's no aid. It's not like in deep sky where you can employ a mask or a smart focuser that can do it for you. With planetary is really different, but the best way that you can attack focusing is you're going to do a mental exercise here. So visualize you're on your telescope and you're focusing. So you've got your planet on the screen, and you've got your hand on the knob, and you're turning the knob one direction or the other. At some point close to focus, you'll notice most of the time that for some duration of your twisting action, nothing changes. That's when you're approximately close to focus, because you're going from a big blob out of focus, closer to focus, in focus, then closer to focus again on the other side, and then going out to way in focus. So what you want to do is you want to sort of identify where that area is as you're twisting your knob when things don't change, when you're close to focus, and sort of find the halfway point and just leave it at that. Okay. When conditions improve, go back to the same thing. You'll have a slight improvement, but you'll be at roughly where you need to be. And again, you'll only be able to focus precisely in planetary imaging when you have exceptional conditions.
Yeah.
And case in point, I have an incredibly accurate focusing motor on this telescope that I barely use.
Interesting.
I barely use it. I barely use it because I rarely have excellent conditions. By excellent, I mean perfectly stable for extended periods of time. That rarely happens. But when it does, it definitely is a pleasure to be able to focus by clicking on the screen and being able to focus on individual belts and formations on Jupiter, or on a 2 arc second Uranus, or
Yeah.
on the C ring on Saturn. But that rarely happens. So most of the
Yeah.
time you're shooting through mush, and what you want to do is you want to identify where that average point is and just get as close as possible to that, halfway.
Okay.
That's
Okay. That makes
I
sense.
think that's the best way I can describe it.
No, that's good. I appreciate you, going into that detail. I mean, it's kind of what I do, but I guess it's just more a matter of our seeing tends to be bad most of the time, and it just makes you not really sure you're at the sweet spot, and I tend
I
to,
totally get it. I totally get it.
yeah,
And that's why I emphasize this method so much, because most of us don't live in exotic locations where we have excellent seeing all the time, continuously throughout the night. So you need some way of harvesting the best that the night has to give.
yeah,
And
that makes sense by doing those
I think
sequential.
by doing this sort of imaging, that's probably the best way you're gonna capture that.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Copios, I have a question about Registax. When you sharpen it with the wavelets,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
notice you have an interval of 0. And when I've tried to do that, when I look at the previews, it looks like all the wavelets are the same.
Can you come
You
again?
have a
Sorry.
step increment of 0 on there.
Yeah.
And when you look at the preview buttons, to me, it seems like they're all the same and no differential on it. I don't understand.
Well, that has to do with your data as well. How good is your data? Is it resolved enough where you can see the full effect of the wavelets? Because if it's not really good data with adequate resolution, wavelets will do very little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'd be happy to take a look at your data. You can go ahead and email me something, and I'll be happy to look at it.
Yeah.
If you'd like.
I have more experience lately with solar hydrogen alpha images, where I know I've got adequate resolution and everything, but if I have the step increment at 0, I click on the buttons under preview, and I don't see that they're affecting anything different from one layer to the next.
Well,
I don't know.
I've said this a lot. You really have to play around with the settings and find what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can offer more of a general advice, that would be never to chase the detail that you can see on the screen. What I mean by that is, a lot of people sort of push the wavelets too hard, trying to coax out the last bit of detail that's detected on the data at the expense of the overall presentation. So I would say if the night is that bad, and if the data is that bad where you're sharpening and you can't really see much happening, then it's probably not worth it anyway. And most of the time with excellent seeing, or with good or really good seeing, you don't really need to sharpen that much. It all depends on the seeing. And one example, a couple of years back, there was this imager from, I think he was in Singapore, that had gone on and posted what he described as an average night, and he put up a raw video, and the video was sharper than most of my processed images, and it was just incredible, and the setup was fairly similar. So again, if conditions don't want, you're not gonna do much.
Okay.
So let's see if we can maybe do another. No, yeah, definitely worse conditions now than before. But let's keep at it.
In our neck of the woods, Agapios, we would call that typical conditions, or even not so bad. This is worth going out for.
Yeah, that's
It's
a very
always-
average night.
It's
Yeah,
always
just like
worth
average.
going out.
Yeah.
It's always worth going out. Always. I'll tell you, my best images came when I least expected it. When I was when I wasn't expecting good conditions. That's when I got the best images. So it's always worth it.
Now, Agapios, you talked about the higher frame rates and shooting real high, but I noticed you're down at around 56.
Yeah, that's due to the combination of the exposure and the region of interest that I'm using. I can easily push that higher.
Now, how hard do you push the gain? I mean, now you got to push the exposure down to pulling the gain out.
with no fear. With no fear, you can shoot at even full gain. You have to remember that you're stacking an incredible number of frames. So the effect of noise in the individual frames, because of the total number of the frames that you're going to end up stacking, will be how do I put this? Will not be that significant, assuming that the seeing is cooperating anyway. But I very often shoot at really high gain with no real issue, especially with these newer sensors. They've been so well behaved in controlling noise. I don't know if I can show an individual frame. Let's just open up. Okay, so these are individuals that you're looking at right now, and you can see that they're I mean, compared to previous generation sensors, such as the 224, for example, individual frames were a complete mess. They're just incredibly noisy. With these sensors, there's no comparison. They're much smoother, and they can take a lot of processing. Let's see if this one's done. Not entirely unusable. But as you can see, this was so this was 3,359 frames in total, and we took a quarter of that, and we've done all the sharpening, and noise is really low. It's a fairly smooth image, especially if you remember the first generation cameras, the 2U or the SPC, or the first imaging source cameras. 1,000 frames or 800 frames or 1,500 frames, they couldn't really take much sharpening. Whereas with these cameras, it's, I mean, I've done under good seeing, I've published just a 1 minute video of Jupiter, and maybe 10% of 200 FPS. So something like 300-400 frames in total, and it was a beautiful, smooth image. So yeah, they've really come a long way.
Agapios, can you explain to us how you choose alignment points and how you decide what size to make them and how many to use?
So there's a whole lot of science behind that, but the best way to describe it is, again, it has to do with just how well your telescope can resolve the details. But to put it in a sort of a rough perspective, the size of the alignment points has to do with the finest detail that you can resolve, and the placement of the alignment points has to do with, or should be, in places where difference in contrast is evident. So where we place them has to do with how well there's contrast differences there, for example, on the bands. And the sizing of the alignment points has to do with just how fine a detail we can resolve in the individual frames. But any difference in alignment point size will be minute, and it will not be as significant a difference as better seeing conditions. So what I mean by that is, you can take the same data set and play around with it, and you'll see that changing the size of the alignment point doesn't really have, I mean, not changing it significantly, but going from a 50 to a 55 or a 60, or from a 70 to an 80 or something like that, won't really change the outcome that much, whereas better conditions will. So for this image, for example, I'm using something like a 72 alignment point size, and I'm placing them where contrast is obvious. For example, on the edge here, on the north equatorial band, on the edges, and I'm also overlapping them. Overlapping them is important because when the software has information from more than one alignment point, it does a much better job at figuring out how to put the data together in the final stack. So overlapping them is really important, and placing them where contrast is high is also really important. How many alignment points you put depends again on the data set. But if you can get the target reasonably well occupied by alignment points, and not really go crazy with a tiny number and a huge a tiny size and a huge number of alignment points, then you should be good. But you can just go ahead and play with different configurations on one data set, and see how that works for you. Let's go ahead and try the last one. I think it's slightly improved now. Okay, so we're doing about 100 frames per second now.
Now you're collecting that data through clouds, right?
No more clouds. From what I can see, nope. We're good.
Oh, great.
Beautifully clear now. Jupiter overhead, the Pleiades, I can see Orion, Sirius, winter is coming.
Too bad it's almost time to wake up.
Oh yeah, that too.
Agapio, so you're doing 1 minute 1 minute duration samples. Do you have any concern with the rotational speed? I know I tend to stay around 45 seconds, something like that. The most I would go on Jupiter would be, say, one minute. Do you ever see any artifact due to rotation at a minute?
So 2 points there. One, AutoStacker compensates for some rotation, but the time limit that you can shoot will depend on your resolving power, which is a function of your telescope and camera. So the smaller the telescope, the longer you have. The bigger the telescope, the shorter that time period will be. And most of all, again, the scene. So I shoot on Jupiter, I shoot 60 seconds because empirically that works for me. And that works for me because I am very particular about keeping my telescope perfectly collimated. So I take that out of the equation. So I'm sure I'm perfectly well collimated, and the only unknown that I have is how good the seeing is. But I stick to 60 seconds for Jupiter. I shoot roughly 90, 120 seconds for Saturn, and maybe 90 seconds for Mars. But those settings are not, and no setting is set in stone. I've talked about this again. Nothing is fixed in this game. You have to experiment. You have to test your equipment. You have to evaluate your seeing conditions. You have to learn your equipment. You have to learn your conditions. You have to play with it. You have to see what works for you. There's no recipe for this. There's only rough pointers, rough guidelines, things that you can obviously do wrong or obviously do right. Then everything else is, you have to play with it.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
Okay, let's if we can push up the frame rate. Okay, so we're now up to 200 FPS, and let's try another one. Let's do a sequence. Another one of Firecapture's really awesome tools is the ability to shoot sequentially, and we're going to employ that now. Just get this out of the way. Okay. Oop. All right, so with auto run, I can set Firecapture to do a sequence of captures with identical settings. So we have it set to do 20 60-second videos, and let's just let it go. Okay, just keeping an eye on the planet here, make sure that it's in the center. I know people who have automated planetary imaging, at least up to the point of automating everything except the atmospheric dispersion corrector. Everything else can be automated. So you can even do this with a remote setup. The only thing you will not be able to check remotely is collimation and the atmospheric dispersion corrector. Everything else you could. But for me, collimation is an indispensable part of the process, and it's something that I lay great stress on collimating your telescope every time before you use it, every single time, because much like playing a musical instrument, you want to tune it before you play, and you tune it every time before you play, and the same thing with optical instruments. Especially for those who don't have permanent setups, it is absolutely paramount that you collimate every time. And even if you do have a permanent setup, I highly recommend that you don't leave collimation to luck. I'm somewhat permanent. I'm on on a dolly type mount, and I just roll the telescope a few meters from the shed to where I set up for my observing, and even that action results in miscollimation every time. So don't be afraid of collimation. I know a lot of people are apprehensive about touching their precious secondary mirrors, but it's part of it's part of being a telescope operator. You need to know how this thing works. You need to command the instrument. So learning how to do it and making sure that you adopt collimation as part of the entire night's process, you can only benefit from that. And there's all kinds of ways you can do it. Find whatever works the best for you. I have talked a great deal about another freeware that is really powerful, MetaGuide. I have I've done extensive talks on it, and I highly recommend using it for high resolution planetary imaging. Another free software. So let's just go ahead and try one of these. Okay, somewhat of an improvement here. I'm sure that there will be some usable data at the end of the night. What I can do is I can sort of pre-process everything that we have collected and put it in a shared folder, and you guys can access it and download it and have a go and try and do your own processing on this data, and please send me whatever results you have. I love corresponding with everybody who's interested in doing this sort of thing. So please do that, and we can have a back and forth, and hopefully we can at least come at the end of the night with a reasonably good image.
So, Agapios, if you're familiar with our website, we have a forum. I'm not sure. I think you might have been on it before, but I think it can hold a considerable amount of data. I don't know how much you can upload onto it, but if you ever
we don't need to upload the full data on the forum. What we can do is, once everybody has had a go at it and produce their own final image, we can post those on the forum.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh.
But if you need help accessing that, just let me know.
Yeah, sure.
Now you're making me want to have a vacation and go out and visit you over there.
Anytime.
Yeah,
Open invitation to everybody.
it's not just you, my relatives are up my butt to come and visit them out there too.
Mhm.
I haven't been there in 15 years. So I'm due.
Open invitation to everybody.
Yeah, maybe we can make a club trip.
Did anybody catch the annular eclipse? Anybody made a trip down to the where it was visible?
I know several people from the club have. I'm not sure if they're here or not.
It was cloudy here, so we didn't even see the partial.
When's the next one? In April?
April, but that's a total. That's very nice.
Mm. Is the center line close to where you guys are?
No.
No, it's about 1,000 miles.
Oh,
Well, actually, a small portion probably gets only about 300 miles up in the far end of the state.
Yeah,
But the weather
yeah.
forecast there is less favorable.
mm.
Yeah, we're going to Ohio, which may not have a high chance of clear skies, but it's easier to get to than Texas.
Yeah, Texas is probably the best place.
Yeah, Texas has the it's a longer duration too, but they
So-
can also have their spotty weather in April. I mean, they last couple years,
It's
seemed like
tornado
every
time.
week, yeah, they were having tornadoes come through.
Yeah, dust storms and tornadoes. So Agapios, there's an excuse for you to come visit us.
Believe me, I'd love to.
Yeah, there are a number of people from the club heading down to Texas. You know, they've already booked things or have things lined up. I think some are going out to Erie. I think like Scott Ewer, Drew Mazer, those guys are going out to Erie. Mike Atwell, I think, is going out to Ohio, and Wayne said you were.
Yeah, we're going to Ohio. We want to go to Dayton, Ohio, for other reasons, and that's right near the center line. So we'll see if we get lucky.
Yeah, they say, Wayne, that just on the eastern side of Cleveland, right on the lake, actually, has almost the same percentage of possible seeing as Texas. A lot of Texas. I mean, it's about 50%, but you got to be within like 5 miles of the lake, because at that time of the year it's frozen still, and the clouds don't form until about 5 miles after, east of the lake. So right on the lake, it's like a 48% chance of clear skies, and versus like Texas is 52% or something.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's a good tip. And the path goes into that region, like 5 miles,
Yeah,
within
yeah.
5 miles of the lake.
yeah. It
Interesting.
passes right through there. So it's the best possibility that's close.
I didn't consider the frozen lake. Hopefully we'll have a very cold winter.
It's supposed to be snowy.
Yeah, well, we got lucky last time in Missouri with the total eclipse, and a lot of people were thinking of heading east and west from Missouri, and we stayed put there, and we had great conditions. So we could still get lucky in Ohio.
Oh,
Yeah, I
definitely.
mean, this one's a real pig in the poke, because before, you go out Wyoming, for example, and it's had like a 90% chance, there's a lot of places that had above 50% chance. Here, the best you can do is about 50%. It's a stormier time of year. It's going to be pretty, you have to be ready to move, I think, the last day.
Yeah, we're getting clouds.
I think that's a key thing, Tom. Being mobile. and being able to, adjust your location for observing it depending on the storms.
You're going to drive your van out, Gary?
That's what we're planning to do. We're planning to, hopefully I'll have it, far enough along for a long trip like that. We've gone up to Maine and gone places like that, but going out to Texas is,
Yeah.
considerably further. And it would take longer too. We'd want to do other things if we're going to go that far. So I've been trying, working on cabinets and trying to finish up that stuff. So at least the main, the main sort of pleasantries are there. I have all the infrastructure in, but it's more a matter of the creature comforts at for a trip.
How
that
much
long.
you're roughing it.
Exactly. Like going up to Cherry Springs with it, half done. That's not a problem at all. But going to Texas with it half done, we might get on each other's nerves if
Yeah,
we
right.
can't work efficiently.
Yeah.
But that's a big part of why we're taking the van, is because if the weather gets really nasty in one area, you can drive 300 miles in a day or 400 miles if you needed to, and just get to a better spot.
Yeah, I think that's the way. I think that's a good choice in this eclipse.
Yeah,
getting some clouds, guys.
Getting clouds now.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, it's dimming a little.
Well, you still got a considerable amount of data there.
Oh, for sure.
Agapios, you let me know when you're ready to call it.
I think we can finish the sequence before we have any major problems. Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and prepare a folder with all the data. I'm gonna go ahead and do some stacking because the raw will be a significantly high number of gigabytes. So I'm going to go ahead and do some stacking, and I'm not going to do any sharpening, and make those available so that you guys can download and play with it. But please feel free to send me any results, and feel free to contact me anytime. I've said this a lot. I'm out here on my own on this island, and these sort of things are the only way that I can reach out and communicate to people with similar interests when it comes to high resolution planetary imaging. So I love conversing, and feel free to reach out, send me images, send me questions, whatever. And I love to hear from you guys.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're happy to have opportunity in here.
Agapios, before we wind down, I have a question about batch processing in AutoStacker.
Yep.
When you're, how does it handle, like when you're, I've done it, and I tend to set the alignment points on on the image file that I have loaded, and I assume that's sort of the first one in the sequence. But then how does it apply that same those alignment points to the subsequent files that it's processing in in the batch?
What do you mean? How does it apply?
Like, does it find the sort of centroid of the planet and then just put that same set of alignment points on it? So it's smart enough to do that, and to
it's fairly straightforward to figure out where the target is and exactly what part of the target is where, assuming you have fairly good resolution. But it's fairly straightforward.
Okay.
But on that point, what I would advise is, when it comes to shooting consecutive and doing batch processing, think of it in stages, sort of like this. So let's say you have a batch of 100 consecutive captures, and
Okay.
somewhere in those 100 consecutive captures, you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 consecutive great captures that you want to extract from those 100 and derotate. What you want to do is batch process at whatever stack percentage you please,
Right.
isolate those, figure out where they are, sort of say, and once you found which ones are those sharper ones, go back and do another batch process with stricter criteria.
On
So that
just those files?
on just
those ones that,
those better ones that you intend to keep for the final image, and
I see.
sort of be stricter with your stack percentage or your alignment point placing or whatever, as long as you have found where those are.
I see what you mean. So you sort of do the initial batch
Yeah.
processing as sort of
Yeah.
a screening
Yeah.
mechanism. Then you find the best.
Exactly.
Then you go in and sort of tighten the reins to get finer
Exactly.
detail.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, that's a great,
Yeah.
great suggestion.
Now, is the point of that to stack the stacks at the end? Is that how
Exactly.
you rotate?
But stack the good stacks.
Right.
Figure out where those good stacks are and stack those in the best possible way.
Doesn't WinJupos do that for you to some extent?
Yeah, but it needs to know which ones you want to use. So the point here is to find which ones are the best ones that you can use for a derotated image.
Gotcha.
Because when you're stacking the stacks, you don't want to include garbage. You want to make sure that they're the best ones possible.
And that's hence these another side benefit then of having, large groups of captures, right? This sort of continuous sequential captures.
Exactly. Fishing with a net.
Right.
So, Agapios, now, what do you do the rest of the year now when the planets are on the other side of the sun? Jupiter's going to go away soon. Are you dabbling into deep sky imaging?
Yeah, it's probably the only time I do deep sky imaging. Just finished the remote observatory that we were talking about earlier, and I get to play with that a lot now. So I just if I can say that I have a hobby, then deep sky imaging is probably more a hobby to me than all other kinds of imaging, because I do that very casually, and I'm not really that much into the end result when it comes to deep sky imaging. I don't really strive for the perfect image. I really enjoy watching the equipment perform, and whatever data comes out of that, that's just an added benefit. I'm sort of a gearhead in that sense. So yeah, if I have time, yeah, that's probably what I do, especially now with the remote observatory. It's just so much easier.
So, when do you anticipate the big observatory opening?
Hopefully end of the year.
With the 28th.
Yeah. Before Christmas. The official handover date is November 30th. So if you allow some time for any unforeseen events, hopefully by Christmas time, that will be open. And who's getting the first live stream from that observatory? I don't need to say more.
It would be a treat to see that.
it will be a Wednesday.
Well, you know what? If the weekend works better, we will try to make it the weekend.
Yeah.
You know, we can talk about that as it gets closer.
All right, guys. Well, I have to sign off. It's 4 a.m. here. I am beat, but it has been really enjoyable. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
as I said, feel free to reach out to me on email, social media, whatever. Send me images, questions, whatever, or just chat. I'm up for it. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Lou, Tom, guys, everybody.
Thank
It
you
was
very much.
Always,
Thank you.
always,
Thank you.
always
Thanks
a
a
pleasure.
lot.
So much.
Thank you. Yeah,
Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you.
very
Thank
enjoyable.
you.
Okay, have a
Take
good
care.
night's sleep.
Thanks.
Καληνύχτα.